Actually wanted to introduce our speaker today. That is Dr. Chris van Dijk, who's been the CEO of the MPO for the last 5 years. Dr. van Dijk he had his own practice, a vet practice for many, many years. But ask him anything from feeding, reproduction, production, anything you want to know about the dairy cow, you can ask him with confidence, and I know he will give you the correct answer. So he was a private vet, and then he was also a director at one of the most sought after and international pharmaceutical companies. So his experience is unlimited for us. And I hope that you will enjoy and take all the information that you can get from him during his presentations. As today, he will give you a presentation on the metabolic health of a dairy cow. And after that, it's Kenneth Botha who will talk about dairy nutrition. After Kenneth, it's again Dr. van Dijk, who will discuss repeat breeders as well as welfare of a dairy cow. So enjoy the briefings.
Yeah, Dr. Chris is more than welcome to start.
Okay, Helena, thank you for the introduction. Fortunately, I see under the guests, I've got some of my previous colleagues, from the pharmaceutical company. And then also Professor Dirk Lourens is also on board. So, if I don't know the answer, then I'll refer then to Dirk and ask him to answer it first, please. Okay, I'm going to start. I trust that you can see me and that you can hear me. Unfortunately, you need to look at my background in my office this morning. You can see I've got my little milk can there, and next to it is a veterinarian, and I've got my cows there, wire cows there. It's unfortunately in Nguni and some other crossbreed there. So it's not a proper Holstein there or a proper Jersey there, but yeah, dairy is important to me, and that's why I've got the dairy pictures on the left-hand side there. What we're going to do today is, and it's actually the wrong way around, Kenneth Botha should actually have started there. Okay, metabolic health, as I said, it should have been actually first Kenneth Botha. Tomorrow, Professor Lourens will then take us through the veterinary nutritionist. I think that's one guy. I read an article one day, and the heading of the article was a veterinary nutritionist, a match made in heaven. As I said yesterday, if you look at the TMR, it's a little bit less when you look at pasture-based. But if you look at the TMR, it's about 68% of your variable cost is nutrition, is your feeding. And if that's not in place, you're not going to be having a successful dairy farm. You're not, you as a veterinarian are going to struggle because you will sit with a lot of problems there. In the end, we can add a lot of value. We as veterinarians, nutritionists can most definitely need to be on top or on board, not on top. They need to be on board and on top of feeding. Otherwise, it's going to be a train smash. I'll refer to as train smash later on again. But I think it's important, that we become involved in this. We need to understand nutrition and understand the very basics, what's happening in the rumen with the volatile fatty acids, protein feeding, the macronutrition, protein, energy, and then also the micronutrition. We tend to learn everything about the selenium deficiency and the manganese deficiency and abnormal high levels of chromium and things like that, and copper poisoning. But yeah, we need to understand the very basic. We need to know the basic nutrition, and from there we can then actually become involved and in more in depth. So what I'm going to do is, I would like to take you back. For me, I calculated this morning, 37 years ago, I had to study this, and I think some of you 4, 5, 6 years ago, you had to study this. The ketogenesis pathway on the left-hand side, what's happening with fat. And we're going to focus a lot on that, the acetoacetate, the acetone, the beta-hydroxybutyrate, that's all, if there's not enough, if the cycle on the right-hand side is compromised and there's a problem and we're running into an energy deficiency, and I think we mentioned it yesterday, Skalk Greiling mentioned it, I did mention it once or twice, but I think in the end is, this is the very basis of and so I refer you back to this. This is not for exam purposes, but this is for self-study again. You need to understand exactly what's happening in the Krebs cycle, you know, after glucose enter the cycle on ATPs eventually, you know, for the energy. And then on the left-hand side, if there's not enough energy, what will start happening in the ketogenesis pathway? So go back to that, and I think it's important that we, you know, when I studied this, or when I forced this down our throat in first year, I think we did it a little bit in first year, but also in second year in physiology, you know, I thought, now why do we need to learn all of this? And later on, I realized, you know, that the lecturers are not, they're actually clever, you know, they put everything in place. And then for that reason, you know, we actually, it's a sequence, a cascade of things, give them this, give them that, and eventually we can come to something of that I would like to discuss today. And that's the metabolic health, and then how it actually associated with fertility in the dairy cow. Important thing of veterinary science is, you know, you've been almost operating in compartments. You've been doing small animal medicine, large animal medicine, small animal surgery, large animal surgery. Now you need to bring all these things together. I think that especially for a large animal practitioner, epidemiology is you know, it's sometimes we also think it's a subject that no one needs to know anything about it. But there you learn, you know, the host factors, the environmental factors, the pathogens. You actually can bring in with using epidemiology as the pivot or the center of everything. You can bring everything together. And that's where you stand, you know, next to a cow and you say, damn it, what's the problem here? You know, my little acronym for when I don't know, you know, when a lecturer asks me at Honest Poort, what's the DDs for this or that? Now, damn it, the acronym is D for degenerative, autoimmune, metabolic, neoplastic, infectious, and toxic. I think you can keep a lecturer, especially in an oral exam, you can keep him quite busy, you know, if you use that sequence, except when they start asking, you know, tell me about how does it look microscopically, and, you know, then you know you've got a problem. But I think it's important, you know, to always to think, you know, and use the same. And you will see tomorrow when I do the abortions in the investigation of an abortion case, or any abortion, you know, abortion storm on a farm. There's a sequence that you need to follow. You need to look at this, then at that, then at that. And you can't mix it up, and you can't skip 2 or 3 of the different, call it subjects, or the themes there. You need to look at every one. If it's 1 to 10, you need to look at all 10 of them. So, okay, as I said, you know, the Krebs cyclist ketogenesis pathway, we're not going into a lot of detail now on that. But I will touch on it when we go through this. So when you look at what I'm going to do as an introduction, then I will go back to the negative energy balance. You know, that's one of the most important things that one need to understand, especially from a dairy cow. In that period after calving, usually she's running, she hasn't got, you know, she can't get enough energy from the ration. And then eventually she can run into a negative energy balance. And that negative energy balance is playing a huge role, especially when it comes to reproduction. In reproduction, and I'll refer to it later on, to nadir. Nadir is a Arabic name for the lowest point, or Arabic word for the lowest point. But the lowest point is where we need to get to. And the sooner we can get to that lower point, the sooner this cow can ovulate. And I'll show you some detail on that a little bit later on. The management of the transition cow. The transition cow, you know, I always say the dry cow is not the end of the previous lactation. It's very, very, very important to realize that is the beginning of the next lactation. You're going to prepare that cow, you're going to immunize her, get the immunity up to scratch. You're going to use dry cow therapy. You know, these days we've got teat seal that you can put in, bismuth nitrate as an example. And I think you will, on Thursday, Dr. Chantal Arwe will tell us a little bit more about that. But yeah, there's a lot of things that can happen in the dry period. You can also start feeding, and I'll get back to that later on. You can also start feeding anionic salts, and there's a lot of other nutritionally wise things that you can do, you know, to prepare this cow then for this peripartal period, you know, just after calving. I would like to say the first important 30 days after calving. 30 to 60 days. And then peripartum metabolic monitoring also important. You know, how do we monitor these things, and how can we become involved there? So if we look at the introduction there, I think reproduction efficiency, in my opinion, of a lactating herd is a major component of profitability. The sooner we can get this cow pregnant, and then I think Skalk did mention it yesterday, very, very important. You know, we need to get this cow pregnant before day 83, 85. That's almost the cutoff point, you know, in an average herd. But I would like to say we need to focus on that. I think he did mention yesterday, pushing it up to 100 days, 120 days, you know, with a voluntary waiting period of 60, 70 days before you start looking. We need to immediately after calving, we need to start observing. You need to see at least 75% of the cows should be on heat before day 50, at least once. You know, we're not going to inseminate this cow, because then we can, you know, we can actually monitor, and we can look at our observation skills, because a lot of people will actually miss those cows. If you can pick her up, you know, during the first 50 days, call it a voluntary waiting period before you start breeding, you can actually add another 18 to 21 days, and then you know more or less where to watch this cow again. Many of the cows will come on heat during night time, and then you can actually miss them. And I think this is profitability. If you look at profitability, and you know, you will see I've got partial budgeting, a very, very important part also of a role that you as a veterinarian can play, especially if you want to convince the farmer, you know, to become involved in something. You want to use a expensive antibiotic like call it a tulathromycin. I'm not going to mention the trade name now, but tulathromycin as an example. You know, when you pitch on that farm and tell the farmer this is 2,000, 3,000 rand a bottle for 100 milliliters, he will tell you to go away. But we need to convince him, you know, that you're going to reduce the morbidity, the mortality. That specific product is used for, especially in feedlots, but you can also use it in other animals, but that's more specifically for pneumonia, a very, very good product. And then maybe the last, not the last resort, you know, but that's the heavy artillery when it comes to pneumonia. Okay, establishment and the maintenance of pregnancy, I've underlined some of the important things. And as I said, you know, this will be available, not because I did this, but I think this is a good summary when you look at, you know, this whole presentation on metabolic health, and then also bringing it together with reproduction. But there's several genetic, physiological, and also environmental factors that can be manipulated in order to sustain high fertility. And then we'll touch on it a little bit later on. And I think Kenneth Botha and then also Professor Dirk Lawrence will touch on it again tomorrow. Okay. But it's also well described in literature. And again, you know, I've got the references. The references are available where I got all this from. You know, it's not all from my frontal lobes, all what's stated on these. You know, we do use references, but it's stated and well described in literature that poor metabolic health influences reproduction in dairy cows. And again, the very important thing there, the energy status. This, you know, this modulates the secretion of hormones that play a very, very important role in the, you know, the luteinizing hormone, the estrogen, the progesterone, later on, you know, prostaglandin, all those things for the ovarian structures, the ovulation, the oocyte, the competence of that oocyte, you know, can it survive after it's been ovulated? And then can it travel down the fallopian tube, and can fertilization happen, you know, and eventually, you know, can it then be implanted on the uterine wall? But then if you run into a negative energy balance, then the fat will start metabolizing. You know, there's the fat or the lipolysis or the lipolysis and the fat metabolism. This is then detrimental to oocyte competence. So we want energy from, you know, from glucose, and not energy coming from a secondary level of energy coming from a breakdown of fat. And then also very, very important, you know, especially that fresh cow, the impaired metabolic health will often lead to immunosuppression and diseases that further reduce fertility. So you will sit with endometritis, you will sit with other problems, you know, if there's tick-borne diseases like anaplasmosis and babesiosis, red water as an example on that farm, you will see more cases in that, and you will see more cases of fresh cows calving down with mastitis and things like that. So yes, in the end, this is a cycle, a vicious cycle. You know, if there's not enough energy, then we will run into problems, and then you will have a immune suppression of the immune system, and then eventually, you know, your whether it's your cell-mediated immunity or your circulating antibodies in the blood itself, that will be affected. Okay, the prevalence of this, you know, if you look at the transition from non-lactating pregnant, so it's from non-lactating pregnant, so the pregnant animal, you know, at dry-off, she's pregnant, to the non-pregnant lactating state, require drastic steps in energy partitioning. And this is all going to happen just after calving, because we need a lot of energy, you know, to synthesize or to make milk. You know, that's basically where most of that energy will be going to. It will be partitioned to the udder, and then it will be taken away from the cow. This is why we say, you know, the farmer's terminology, that cow is milked off, or says afgemelk in Afrikaans. You know, that's, you will typically see it in this typical language that the farmer will use. Then the body reserves, especially the fat, but then also your amino acids. It's the building blocks of your protein, the minerals, the vitamins. All these things are mobilized. And then despite all the controls that's built in there, 45 to 60% of cows then develop metabolic and infectious diseases in the first month of lactation. And this is where we as nutritionists, veterinary nutritionists themselves, and then also us as veterinarians need to come in, you know, to assist that and see if we can reduce that 45 to 60% of cows there to a number, you know, that's much closer to zero. We will never get it to zero, but, you know, 45 to 60%, this is according to literature, is much too high, and we need to work on that. You know, if you look at the US, numbers from the US, dystokias, 14% in TMR herds, confined herds, and then about 8% in grazing pasture herds. Metritis, 16%, 5.76% in grazing herds. Clinical endometritis, 20%, 14%. And then the big problem that we do have is that about 55% of those cows were less likely to resume ovarian activity by the end of the voluntary waiting period, and 32% were less likely to become pregnant. So this is all contributing, you know, to our problem that we do have with reproduction, and this is what we need to address. If you look at some of the diseases there, let me just move something here on my screen. You can see there association among diseases and fertility. Subclinical diseases, I've listed 3 there. You know, hypocalcemia, subclinical hypocalcemia. Clinical hypocalcemia is easy. You get into that, give it a bottle of calcium or MSC or something like that. The cow will you know, shake her ears and she will stand up, and then you will say, thank you, okay, the product did work. It's always very dramatic, you know, when you inject a cow and 2 minutes later she's alive again with a clinical hypocalcemia or milk fever cow. But subclinical hypocalcemia is a much bigger problem, like subclinical mastitis. All the subclinical things that we can't see, and this is what we need to do as veterinarians, you know, to bring that knowledge, to convince the farmer that we need to look at that, you know, subclinical ketosis as an example. The energy balance based on the non-esterized fatty acids, the negative energy balance, you know, that's a huge problem, because in the end that's again contributing to ketosis. So subclinical disease, and then some of the clinical diseases that you can get, dystocia, there's just not enough calcium around. You know, the cow can't push because you need calcium also for the birth process, together with the oxytocin, for the contraction of the uterus and so on. But if there's not enough calcium, you know, she can't use all the muscles in the pelvic, in the birth canal, and it's impossible then to get that calf out. Metritis, endometritis, mastitis, pneumonia, digestive problems, lameness, you know, and this varies, you know, in one farm, dystocia could be number 1. On another farm, lameness will be number 1. But I think these, if you start picking up these diseases, and I would say if it's more than 2, maximum more than 5%, so you need to record this. These days, with all the fancy computer programs, there is a possible, or it has got the ability to actually to record all this. So if you pick up there that, you know, there is a 10% pneumonia in your fresh cows, or 10% pneumonia in your calves, or whatever, you need to understand this is now time to intervene, and you need to examine those animals. Cordelia, you must just shout if there's any question. I can't also read the questions. Maybe if there's a question, you know, specifically around some of what I'm busy saying. Okay, quickly, I can't see any questions there. But then on the right-hand side there, let me go there, the health problems. Okay, some of the health problems. Pregnancy. This is at day 65. You know, so in other words, you inseminated more or less at day 45, day 50, and then, you know, the pregnancy at day 65. Healthy animals, we will have about 66%. If there's a subclinical problem, it's reduced already by, what's that, 6 plus 3, 9% there. Clinical disease only 46, so it's from 66 down to 46. Subclinical and clinical reduced to 66, reduced to 42 there. So that's, you know, on that one. If you look at the next one there, the cows, number of cows that's cycling, you know, that's coming in to eat. Healthy animals, about 95% of the animals will start cycling. As I said, at least 75% of animals should be observed in the first 50 days. If you do not observe it, then you know there's either a problem, you know, with a lot of anestrus or cows just not cycling, but in about 80% of cases, it's just not observing. You know, most of the cows will have a very quiet heat, and then there's not a lot of activities going on, and especially at night time. But okay, if there's no health problem, if the animal is healthy, 96% of those animals will be cyclic, and the estrus cycle will be normal. Subclinical disease 89%, clinical disease 93%, and then subclinical and clinical disease. So you can see already, you know, 7 plus 5 is 10, 12%, you know, already changed between a healthy animal and then a subclinical and a clinical disease. And then, as I said, you know, it could be hypocalcemia, it could be ketosis, it could be subclinical mastitis, all contributing to those animals that's not cyclic. And then pregnant, this is actually the same as the one at the top, so we can leave this one. Okay, if we go to the negative, I don't know if there's any questions now. Please put the questions. Cordelia will alert me, you know, if there's any question that I need to answer now. But otherwise, I will have a look at it at the end. But okay, negative energy balance, the next chapter in this journey of us tomorrow. Today, not tomorrow. We need to do it today so that you can understand it by tomorrow and that you can repeat it in the final exams there. I think this graph on the right-hand side is a very, very important. You need to understand this. You can look at the white line there. The white line is basically the milk production. So the cow will calf. You know, this is a nice question also in an oral exam to ask him, you know, draw me the lactation curve. And then from there, you can actually start looking at the dry matter intake. You can see the dry matter intake is relatively low, and it only peak here. Let me move my things here. Okay, first of all, the peak milk production will be at about 60 to 70 days after calving. A little bit, you know, this one is maybe a little bit late, it's at about 90 days, but it's usually at about, I would say, between 60 to 70, 60 to 80 days, the cow will peak there. So she will calf, you know, it will be the colostrum, and then she will start producing milk. Usually, you know, that first lactation or after 5 days after the colostrum period, it will be about 4 or 5 liters, maybe 8 to 10 liters. And then she will gradually go up. You know, some cows can peak as high as 70 liters. I've had one cow that actually peaked at, in one of the herds that I attended to, that peaked at 80 liters. You know, she can't continue producing that. And then after that peak, you know, that's a period of about, I would say about a month or so in total, and then it will gradually start going down. And then eventually at about 305 days or 10 months later, you know, she will be at the bottom of her lactation. So physiologically, it's going down. And then, yeah, physiologically also, you need to look at the dry matter intake. You know, the dry matter intake will also go down. And then that will take them through to the dry period. So as I said, you know, this dry period is not the end of this lactation, of the previous lactation, this one here. It's the beginning of the next lactation. Here in phase 1 and phase 2, we need to start preparing them to take them to the next, into the next lactation. But very important also the condition score. You can see the condition score. Let's make this a 3.5. you know, it's a good, it should be at calving, that cow should be in a condition score that's on the Mulvaney scale of about 3.25 to 3.75, not more than 3.75, because then we can run into fatty cow syndrome and then some of the other problems associated with that. Okay, so you can see the condition score will go down from 3.25 down, you know, just touching almost on 2.25, and then gradually throughout the cycle, the body weight will start picking up, and then you can dry her off again. At the same, you know, she calved at 3.5, you dry her off again at 3.5. And then you need to manage, or is drying off is there. And then throughout the lactation, you know, she shouldn't be, or throughout the dry period, she shouldn't be picking up a lot of weight there. You know, she can't be dried off at 3.5, and then you keep on feeding her, and then eventually, because also the problem is that you do have most of the calf, of the growth of the calf is in that last 2 months, you know, so if you overfeed the cow in that period, that's except if you like and enjoy doing cesarean sections late at night, you know, you can't overfeed a cow in that dry period. Okay, so if you look at the left-hand side, so I think it's important to understand this, you know, this is very basic, and I think most of us understand it, but to bring everything together here, you know, this is basically, you know, this is the basis of metabolic health and the whole feeding, and there's a lot of things that you can actually incorporate it into the slide on the right-hand side. Okay, I did mention that on the left-hand side there, but high-producing cows undergo a negative energy balance or negative the energy partitioning in the first 4 to 6 weeks postpartum, and I'll show you some more detail on 1 or 2 slides later on. Okay.